I'm Madison Mary and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please think about hitting the subscribe button. And without further ado, let's get into my best books of 2020. So this is actually going to be my best fantasy books of 2020. I tried, okay? I came up with a list that was like the best overall books of 2020, and like I struggled, okay? And I asked everyone on Twitter, I was like, do you guys mind if I like make fantasy and then everything else like two separate like best of videos? And you all said that's fine. Well, like 80% of you said that's fine, and then 20% of you said no, suck it up. So I went with the 80%. The majority was a lot kinder to me. Without further ado, let's get into my best books of 2020. Fantasy. Best fantasy. Come on, Madison. So coming in at number 10 is going to be The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This was actually the last book that I read for 2020, and it ended up being 5 stars. I was a bit concerned for a while there. It was like 4 stars, and then I completely fell in love with it. I do have a reading vlog for this coming out next month, so I'm keeping a lot of things under wraps when it comes to this book, but it was on my 5-star predictions list and it was a 5-star, and I'm so happy about that. I just fell in love with the magic system in this. I fell in love with the characters. I was really surprised by how palatable it was. I adored the crap out of it, and I've thought that, like, this is my hot take on it, and that's the fact that a lot of people say that ɪᴏsᴛᴏᴅ is like the perfect adult fantasy author. If you want to merge, like go from YA and start trying adult fantasies, that you should do her. But I actually think this is the perfect foray into adult fantasy if you're primarily YA. And that's because of Vin and Vin's storyline in this. She does have a romance in this, so you do kind of get those feelings tickled a little bit. And I just thought that everything was explained in a way that was easy to understand, and I never felt like it was too info dumpy. I adored the world. It had some really cool aspects of it that were like heist-like, and I just thought it was really awesome. This is basically set in a world where the magic is metal, so it's metal allomancy, and so you ingest certain metals and that metal then has a specific magical property. There's a very select group of people that have this like magic ability, and it's only with one metal. And then there are a group of people that are called Mistborns, and they can actually ingest all the metals and then access all those powers. But this world is basically about how years ago during the Great War, the evil person won. And we're following this very well-known Mistborn named Kel as he is planning to overthrow the Dark Lord. And then also Vin, who has just found out that she is a Mistborn and is kind of Kel's protege. And I loved it. Number 9 on the list is a sequel, and that is Godstorm by Coco Ma. If you're new to my channel, you haven't heard me talk about this series. If you are not new, you know that I freaking love this series. So book 1 is Shadowfrost. Godstorm is the sequel. This is a trilogy with the 3rd book coming out this, I think, October or November. And basically it's set in a world where you have elemental magic, and each person like normally has one magic that they're really good at, but there are a couple of people who can control more than one magic, and then there are like very, very, very special people who can control it all. But there is one element, and that is the shadows and like the darkness, and that is the one magic that is outlawed and forbidden. But this takes place in the kingdom of Axaria, which is the kingdom which is frost magic, and we follow Princess Astrid, and she ends up finding out that there is this demon running amok in like the woods, and it is killing every soldier that goes after it. And so she ends up recruiting a small group of people to go and battle this monster basically. But it turns out that there is actually it's so difficult to show this without like spoiling anything, but it turns out that there is a much larger issue at hand when it comes to the shadow magic and the whole world as Astrid knows it. It's a really great series. I will admit I'm a bit biased. I do beta read for Coco Ma, so I do read her books before they come out and like give my opinions on them. But I really do love this series. I wouldn't beta read for her if I didn't love the series. And I think that if you're someone who enjoys elemental magic, if you like fantasy romance, because this does have a lot of romance in it, you're going to adore this series, and it is a series that I highly, highly recommend. So for number 8, we actually have a book that I didn't rate 5 stars, and that is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This was just such an amazing book, and I did rate it 4.5 stars. I felt like the beginning was a little bit too slow, but once I really got into it, I sped through this like no other person. There were some really interesting plot twists in this book, and I constantly found myself thinking, okay, like, what's happening next? What's really going on? Like, how's everything gonna work out? Like, what does this all mean? I'll explain in a second the reason why it's 4.5 and not a 5-star read, and that has to do with the fact of how a lot of people explain this book. So Scythe, it's a dystopian novel. It's set in a world where people don't die anymore. They can jump off of cliffs and they'll be revived and things like that. And there are people called Scythes, and they're the people who have the ability to cull the population and glean them, is the word they use. And Scythes have a lot of rules, you know, they're kind of families, they live for as long as they do. They live for like a really long time, and the only way they can be killed is if they kill themselves. And so we follow these 2 regular teenagers, Citra and Rowan, and they are both chosen by this one Scythe to be his apprentice, to, you know, become Scythes themselves. And it's a really huge deal because it means that their families are now protected from ever being gleaned. Here's the part that I think a lot of people misconstrue, and they say that Citra and Rowan end up having to battle for who wins the apprenticeship, and whoever doesn't win the apprenticeship will be killed and be gleaned by this person who does win and becomes like an official Scythe. The thing is that doesn't happen until like, I want to say a third to like halfway through this book. And so I was reading this thing and I was like, what? Aren't they pitched against each other? Like, I'm so confused. Like, why are they just like training Willie? Like, I was so lost by that, and I was constantly waiting. I'm like, well, when are they pitched against each other? And that's just one disclaimer I'm gonna put out there, that really doesn't happen until like halfway through the book. So if you go into it, just kind of know that it's more so a dystopian novel about these 2 kids who are training to become Scythes, even though they don't really want to be, but it's for the betterment of everyone else around them. And then they kind of start to realize what it means to be a Scythe. And there's so much talk in this book about society in general, and that's what I fell in love with, was all the commentary on, you know, humanity and what it means to be a human and what it means to live in a utopia. What actually is a utopia? I don't believe in utopias, that's just my own personal opinion, but it was... Zelda found a piece of tape and she keeps hitting it and then it gets stuck and then she whacks it off. Oh my god. I can't, sorry. But yeah, 4.5. Number 7 on the list is Hush by Dylan Farrow. This book took me by surprise. I read an arc of it last year and I became obsessed with this world. It was just really intriguing, and I can't explain precisely why I fell in love with it, because it like I said, it took me by surprise as to how this world works and functions. So it's set in a world where there is a plague called the ink plague, and it is transferred through ink, through writing, and so people are banned. You know, you can't have anything of the sorts. And at the same time, this society is ruled by the bards, and the bards have speaking and singing magic, and they help, you know, if someone does get infected with the plague, they can heal them if they decide to, but most of the time they try to find like people who are like breaking the rules to keep them in line. And another reason why is because there are certain words, certain things, certain thoughts that you're not allowed to have. So you can't, like, the word murder or I want to kill you and things like that. Like, you cannot say those things or else the bards will come get you. And it is also thought that like if you think or say these words, you will then become infected yourself with the plague just by saying the words. And so it's a society that is very controlled in like what they do and what they say, which I think says a lot about our own current society in the whole idea of, I don't want to say like in like people being policed for what they say, but I mean, it is true, like, you know, in our current day, like, you know, with the internet and stuff, you can say so many things online and there are consequences, and that's what this is about. But it's also the fact that like some people also are policed on their words and they can't speak out and they're not allowed to. And so we follow Shay, and her brother died, I think a couple of years ago, because he ended up being infected by the plague, and this then labeled her mum and herself as outcasts, as traitors, and so they were forced to then live like on the very, very edge of their village, and like no one wants to trade with them, no one wants to help them, like they're like barely scraping by. and then Shay's mum ends up getting murdered, and she's murdered with this dagger, and this dagger is a symbol of the bards. So she's like, oh my god, like, why was my mum murdered by the bards? Like, what happened? Did something, like, what is going on? And so she then goes out and goes to like the High Bard, like the place where everyone lives, to find out what's actually going on and to find out who killed her mum. But when she gets there, she ends up finding out that she herself has bard magic within her. And so she starts training there to become a bard, while also knowing that someone there killed her mum. And it's really interesting because a lot of the times you're wondering, like, who can she trust? Like, what is the truth of this world? Because it is so steeped in lies and betrayal, and because people have to be careful of what they say, and because there's so many rules, you really don't know what's going on, and so you only know what Shay is seeing. And even then, she kind of thinks that she's going mad because bard magic tends to make women mad, which is a whole nother thing that like is talked about in this, which is the whole idea of like, the women bards, like, they can't handle their magic. And she's like, oh my god, like, can I, like, is it true? Like, can I really not? Like, am I actually going crazy? And a lot of these books, the reason why I gave them, like, they're on this list is because they have such great social commentary, or I just love the romance and the plot of them, or they made me cry. So, you know, it's one of those things. Number 6, we have a standalone, and that is The Shadows Between Us by ɪᴛᴏᴏᴅᴅᴅ. I love ɪᴛᴏᴏᴅᴅᴅ. I love her so much. She's one of my ordered by authors, so it's a surprise that she landed on this list for 2020. I think that anytime she puts out a book, it's gonna end up on the best of. But this follows Alessandra, and she has a plan that she is going to woo the Shadow King, marry him, and then kill him so that she can then become the queen. And oh my god, it's so good because the Shadow King doesn't let anyone near, but she is like, has this whole plan and this plot, and she's very, ɪᴛᴏᴅᴅᴅ's books are always extremely sex positive, and that's the reason why I love them so much, is the fact that we have these female characters who are very confident in their bodies, who are very confident in their sexuality and their sex lives and their urges and what they want. But at the same time, they're also cutthroat, and they will stab you in your sleep if you are not careful. And who doesn't love that? And there's also like a lot of court politics in this, and I adore books that have a lot of court politics and like the comings and goings of courts. And so that's, yeah, I love this. I love this. It's a 5-star, it's a ɪᴛᴏᴅᴅᴅ, there's not much more to say. Coming in at number 5 is Furyborn by Claire Legrand. I was a bit hesitant going into it because I've heard very mixed reviews, but my best friend Katie from Katie's Book Nook, she freaking swears by this book. And I was like, you know what? We have such similar tastes that if I don't love this book, it means I probably hate it. Like, there's no way that she loves something and I don't. And oh my god, I love this. I loved it so much. Like, I was like, wow, amazing. Like, I don't understand why there are people out there who don't like this series, because I thought it was freaking fabulous. So there's a prophecy in this world that there will be 2 queens born, a sun queen and a blood queen. The blood queen will be the death of everything, and the sun queen will be the savior. And so we're following 2 timelines. When this book starts off, we are following ɪᴛᴏ, and we find out, you know, she's the sun queen and things have happened, and maybe she's actually the blood queen and what's actually going on, and then she dies in the prologue. Like, that's literally the first like 2 pages, she's dead. And you sit there and you're like, what just happened? And then you flash back, I think like 5-10 years to when ɪᴛᴏ's power first awakens, and it becomes obvious that she's either the blood queen or the sun queen, and so she has to undergo these trials to prove that she is the sun queen and not the blood queen, because if she is the blood queen, they say that they're gonna execute her. And then we follow 1,020 years after ɪ�l's death, and we're following Eliana, and the world is completely different than what it used to be. Magic is outlawed, it doesn't exist anymore, the world looks totally different, and Eliana is a thief, and she actually ends up getting involved with the prophecy of the Sun Queen and with overtaking the person who is currently ruling over the world or kingdom or country, whatever it is. And it's so interesting because you're wondering how everything is going to connect, because events that happen in ɪ�l's timeline affect what happens in Eliana's timeline, and it's so curious to see how everything kind of functions with one another and how everything is interspersed, and how actually like some of the decisions that Riel makes end up making Eliana's life a lot more difficult, and just the intricacy in knowing how Riel's timeline is supposed to end with her dead. You're like, how does this happen? Like, what goes on? Like, it's, considering that you know the ending, it's crazy how Claire Legrand makes you still so invested. And both of our females, both of the women that we follow, they're very morally grey. I would even go so far as to say that Riel is maybe like a little bit more on like just the flat out evil side, depending on how things go. And you don't normally see a lot of characters like that. You don't see characters that are so tempted by evil, characters that do things and have certain actions that you sit there and you go, she did that. Like she really did that. Like, oh, okay. Also, I will admit there's like a couple of steamy scenes in this. I, surprisingly enough, was not like that invested in the romance plotline of Riel's story, but Eliana's, I adored that. But yeah, I highly recommend this. I cannot wait to continue on the series because apparently book 2 just like explodes in your face with the way that the plot twists come at you. I'm so excited. Coming at number 4 is going to be quite a surprise to some people, considering that book 1 of this series was actually my most disappointing of 2019, and now the sequel is on my best books 2020, and that is Harrow the Ninth. If you saw my vlog of this, you will understand how my thoughts went throughout this. And this is not a book I can explain because it would completely spoil book 1, but it's an adult sci-fi series. And the reason why it's on this list is because this is a series that, even though I struggled with the books and getting through them because they're very dense, and the lore of this world, the magic system, the way that everything functions is very, very detailed, that it requires, like, these books require a lot of brain power. And so I understand why some people really struggle to get through them, but you finish these books and you sit there and they stay with you. Like, I have not forgotten this book for 1 second. Like, it's a 4, I think I gave it a, is it a 4. I think I gave it a 4.5 or a 4 star, but it has stuck with me like no other book this year. Like, I still think of the events that happened in this book, and it just makes me want to reread book 1, which is Gideon the Ninth. I gave that like a 2.5 stars, and I was like, I didn't get, like, it was just really difficult, like everything going on, like it was just too much. But then I read this one and I was like, oh my god, like it's even more confusing. This book's even more confusing, but it was even better. And I was like, oh my god, like I want to go back and read book 1, because I think that this series that started off on such a bad note could actually become a favorite. And that is just so amazing to me. Like, I've never had a series like this before, and so it had to end up here. This series, Gideon the Ninth, Harrow the Ninth, and then eventually Alexa the Ninth, follows this world where there are 9 planets. Each of the planets has their own specific like necromancy and how they function in the overall world. And then you have the emperor of the 9 houses. And so technically there's like 10 planets, but you know what I mean? And there's like spaceships and stuff. It's about how there is this competition every once in a while between the top necromancers of each of the 9 planets. And they each have to go and compete against one another, but also internally, and just against the situation that they're put in. Like, they put on this planet, and some of the things there also try and kill them. It's about how they are brought there, these necromancers, with their cavaliers, and cavaliers are kind of like the protectors, like the muscles. They have to try and figure out how to win this competition to become one of the emperor's like head people. I'm so sorry, I live in New York. A lot of the time, this book, this series feels like a fever dream, but it's like the best fever dream you are ever going to have. And it's also, I mean, it's pretty gay. They're lesbians. It's not as prominent as you would think. A lot of, like, when the book first came out, Gideon the Ninth, it was like lesbian necromancers in space. But the lesbian aspect of it was kind of like a minor, like, subplot, and it still is. It's a bit more of a plot in this one, but it's still like a minor subplot. Like, there's so much more going on with our characters internally and the prophecies of this world and how everything turns out, that it's so much more than just lesbian necromancers in space. It's broken ass humans in space dying. So yeah. Number 3 on this list is 2 books because I have no chill. I still can't believe I only read this last year. Crazy. I read Wicked Saints and Ruthless Gods last year, and I adore this series. I'm so sad that, like, I waited to read Wicked Saints, but I'm also glad that I did because these books leave off on the worst cliffhangers. Like, I mean, I've read worse cliffhangers, but they end and you're like, excuse me? So the best way to explain this series is by saying that there are 2 kingdoms, ɪᴛᴏᴛ and ᴛᴏᴏ, and they are at war with one another. The reason for this is because ɪᴛᴏᴛ is all about the gods. There are multiple gods in this world and they worship them. They have, like, their saints, they have these paladins and these prophecies that they all believe in, and there are special people who can commune with the gods, and if they can commune with the gods can give them blessings and give them powers, and that's like what they believe in. Then you have ᴛᴏᴏ, and they completely renounce the gods. They're like, the gods, yeah, no, they're trash. We're gonna make our own magic, and that's gonna be blood magic. So do beware, there's a lot of, like, ritualistic self-harm in these books. I don't find it at all disturbing, and I do find, like, self-harm, like, a huge trigger of mine, but when it comes to, like, the magical sense, it doesn't bother me. But yeah, like I said, the 2 kingdoms, and then you have 3 POVs. You have Nadia, ɪᴛᴏᴏ, and Seraphine. Nadia is from ɪᴛᴏᴛ. She is, like, very revered by her people because she's one of the only people who can commune with all of the gods. Like, not just 1 or 2, all of them. And that means that she has, like, much more power than anyone else, and she has these prayer beads that she uses to communicate with each of them. They see her as, like, the savior of their people. They see her as, like, the savior of the war. They think that she's gonna be the person who helps them, like, defeat ᴛᴏᴏ. Then you have Seraphine and ɪᴛᴏᴏ. They are both from ᴛᴏᴏ. They're both technically blood mages, but ɪᴛᴏᴏ is, like, this super, super powerful blood mage. But he is actually on the run from ᴛᴏᴏ. Something happened, something bad. He no longer wants anything to do with it, and then he ends up running into Nadia, and they end up forming an alliance to help actually kill the king of ᴛᴏᴏ. Then you have Seraphine, and he is the prince of ᴛᴏᴏ. So he has spent a lot of his time on the front lines, and when the book starts off, he gets called back to court because his dad's like, ta-da, you're getting married, congratulations. And he's like, sir, what? And then he gets there and he ends up uncovering, like, all this shit that's going on in ᴛᴏᴏ, and, like, people trying to kill him and stuff like that. And so it's really interesting. Like, shit gets out of hand. I will admit, book 2 does have hella eye horror in it. I personally thought it was pretty awesome until we got to the very end and there's an eye horror scene that I sat there and I was like, oh god. If you are someone who read you can't even see it, the Grisha trilogy, and you were like, why didn't she end up with the Darkling? That's basically this series, except ɪᴛᴏᴏ is actually a lot worse than the Darklings. Like a lot. Like boy, I love him. He's like one of my book boyfriends, but boy is he messed up. My number 2 book is Beyond the Ruby Veil by Mara Fitzgerald. Sadly, I only own an arc of this. I still don't own a physical copy. Why? I don't know. Considering that's one of my top 2 favorite books of 2020, I don't know why I don't own a physical copy still. I mean, I do, it's just that it's an arc. But this book, it took me by surprise, out of left field, how much I just became enamored and fell in love with this series. So we follow Emanuela, and she has always had one goal in life, and that is to rule her town. Well, yeah, it's like a town. It's a town in the middle of this massive ruby veil, and you can't exit the town or else no one ever comes back. And she's actually been engaged since birth to her best friend Alessandro Morandi, and he is obviously the heir to the Morandi house, and they are actually like the top house of Occhia. And so to her, she's like, bomb, marrying my best friend means I'll basically rule this place because he's in like the top house, which means I'll be the bitch of the top house and no one will ever be able to mess with me ever again. Even though they're both gay, so they don't actually love each other romantically, but they love each other platonically. And she's like, I don't care, I still get to rule, I don't care if I'm not marrying for love. To me, this is way more important. Power is more important than anything else. And that is so about her. Like throughout this entire book, to her, power is the number one thing. She does not care what she has to do to get that. And she makes like bad decisions. Like she's not a good person. And the only problem is that she has this tiny little mark on her hip. And this tiny little mark basically means her death. And that is because her town doesn't have water. And the only way they get water is because there is this magical creature called the water Cree. And the water Cree creates water from the sacrifices of people from the town. And the way that people from the town are sacrificed is because they get this like birthmark on their body eventually, and that means that it is their time to sacrifice themselves. And Manuela has always hidden this until it's the day of her wedding and it is revealed, and then she's dragged off to the Water Cree's tower to be killed, and she's like, no. I tried way too hard for everything. I have so much still left that I have to accomplish. This ain't happening. And so she kills the Water Cree, and next thing you know, there ain't no water. And she's like, uh-oh, because now everyone hates her because of that. And she's like, I saved you. And they're like, but you didn't save us because now we're all gonna die of dehydration. Before we were all gonna die slowly eventually when we had to be sacrificed, and now we're gonna die horrible death. So she actually has to find a way to create water for her people, and so she has to travel beyond the Ruby Veil. And it is so, like, I can't say more than that because what I just explained to you was like the first 15% of this book. The other 85% of this book is so much more. And I think that's what makes this book so amazing, is that you hear about the basic plot, you go into it, and it ends up being like so nuts, so nuts. Like I said, both of our characters are gay, but there are no actual like romances in this book. There are like slight inklings between romances for each of our characters. But the bigger point of this story is the fact that Emanuela will do anything for power. She is so selfish, so selfish. Like yes, her and Alessandro are best friends, but she's really not that great of a best friend. Like she's pretty horrible to him sometimes, and he's just this sweet cinnamon roll. I want to give you a quick quote that like explains basically who Emanuela is, and that is, I have something to believe in too. I believe in myself. I believe that I can change things no one else has ever been able to change, and do things no one else has ever been able to do. I don't care if people love me or if they think what I do is good, but rest assured, they're going to know that I was here. Bam. Okay, and then the last book, the number one book for me for 2020 is Crescent City. I'm not gonna go into this because I have an entire vlog dedicated to me reading this book, and I loved it. I bawled like a child. I read this book in like record time, in my opinion, for myself, and Sarah J Maas can do no wrong for me. I am certified Sarah J Maas trash. I don't really have much else to say other than watch my vlog if you want to get my full thoughts, because I'm not going to sit here and talk about this book because we'll be here for another 20 minutes. And this video is already way longer than I wanted to be. I was like, oh, I'm going to talk about my top 10 books. It'll take me like 20 minutes. And currently this is the 44-minute raw footage video that I'm currently looking at. So we're going to end this here. Let me know down below what your favorite book of 2020 was, because I would maybe read it. Ooh, video idea. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, please hit the like button down below. Like I said at the beginning, if you're not already subscribed to me, please consider hitting the subscribe button if you like what you see. And yeah, that's it. Until next time, bye!